Should I start at the beginning? So I will shorten my introduction. Ruby Namdar is an Israeli writer born and raised in Jerusalem. His first book, the short story collection Haviv, came out in 2000 in Israel and got a prize for first book. Since the year 2000, Ruby and his family has been living in New York, and he's been dividing his time between Israel and the US. He teaches Hebrew and in Jewish literature and in different academic framework, and is an active member of the Laboratory for Jewish Culture. I was just asking you if it's still relevant to say this sentence.
Nothing is relevant the way it used to be. However, we do try to keep going by Zoom, experiencing all these difficulties, including the insufferable angles of camera that are the least flattering in the world. This is our new reality.
Okay, so I will go on. In 2013, Ruby published his book, Habayit Asher Nechrav, The Ruined House in English, a novel that landed in my hands as soon as it was published, or even a little bit earlier, because I got from the publisher what we call the white edition with no cover. And as soon as I read it, I was immediately convinced that this book is an exceptional literary event. In these days, I was ahead of the International Writer Festival in Jerusalem, and I had the opportunity to invite Ruby to the festival. And I can tell you, Ruby, I hope it's okay that I will tell you the audience our little story, that when I wrote to him, he said, "Are you sure that you are inviting me, because nobody read my book yet?" As I said, this will be the opportunity. And I guess I was right, because the same year the novel won the Sapir Award, one of the most prestigious prizes for literature in Israel. So Ruby, with no more introduction, and I hope no problems, I want you to let us in and read for us a short paragraph, just, to feel the taste and feeling of your novel.
Okay. Usually I ask somebody with a better accent than mine to do it, but
now with my accent and your accent, we will,
we will somehow survive, huh?
Yeah.
A cursed city. All boundaries are blurred here. The border among science, art, and pop culture, between truth and public relations, no longer exists. There are too many beautiful people, too many brilliant, ambitious, successful ones. They rub against one another, desire one another, exchange innuendos, smiles, and inner jokes. How can anyone stay sane? It simply can't be done. All the openings of museum shows, of galleries relocated from Soho to Chelsea, of fashionable restaurants, of artsy fringe theaters, all trapped in the bear hug of the city's cultural establishment. I can't even read my own translation, exorbitantly priced French wines and unpasteurized cheeses outlawed by the health department. Artists, academics, models, and billionaires sit knee to knee in a dimly lit proximity that you would say was filled with cigarette smoke, if only anyone still smoked. And this indeed feels like a very far dream. Now, 6 months later, none of this exists now.
Yeah, so I thought it will be, so you will be a very good partner to talk about crisis in New York, crisis of the world. Yeah. But before we are going to this conversation, this theme of the conversation, I want to ask you, for me, it's amazing that an Israeli writer that writes in Hebrew comes to New York, he's a newcomer, and he's writing such an ambitious Thomas Mann ambitious novel about New York and about cultural life in New York. How did you decide to do such a thing?
Yeah. First of all, I know it sounds like a terrible cliche, but these things are not a decision. This novel seized me about a year and a half after I arrived in New York, and it did not let go of me for 10 years. So
10 years. So you started 2003.
Something 2002 to be precise. I laid the first letters on page a month or two before my first daughter was born, and finished this novel in 2012, a decade later. So I think that this novel is a response not just to the wonderful culture shock of discovering this big city, but also to how New York seems when you experience it in Hebrew. There is a biblical resonance to this city that I saw because I am so attached to the Hebrew Bible. And that was for me the anchor of this work. That's why there's a prophetic tone in it. So that was how it was born. The friction between my Hebrew and this mythological place that I suddenly was exposed to.
So for you, New York, you came, it was Babylon?
Yes, absolutely. I came, it wasn't my first time in New York, by the way. I was here a few times before, but this time I was here with an insider's look and under very different personal circumstances, and it was a great adventure. So when I arrived in the year 2000 and made this city my home, I definitely felt that on one hand, I'm walking in the streets of a modern city. Historically, New York is a pretty new city. It's not an ancient city. But at the same time, I felt I'm walking in the streets of an ancient city. And being a Yerushalmi, a Jerusalemite, like Tsila, you would understand, I'm even more sensitive to this tension between new and old. And New York feels like it's filled with ghosts and spirits of a past that actually didn't exist. But the roots of it, to me, go all the way to the ancient cities, Bavel, Nineveh, the cities of the Bible. Yes.
But you came to the city after a huge crisis, after the 9/11
Not
event.
after. I came right before.
Oh, you came right before.
I was here. It was about a year and some after I arrived. And I remember everything about it. I was then a tutor for a young girl living in Midtown, teaching her Hebrew. And I remember how it happened. I have very strong memories of that day. And that was actually September 11, and the crack that I saw opening in this hermetic facade of the city at that time. We didn't even know if the city will survive that crack. It was maybe one of the triggers for me to write this book. It may have created the space for this book to emerge in.
How was the book accepted in America? When was it published in English?
It was published in English by HarperCollins in November of 2017. I have to say I was very pleased with how it was accepted. I mean, the fact that it won the Sapir Prize in Israel paved its way to acceptance here in ways. It made people curious. That's probably why HarperCollins wanted this book. And I was very happy to see quite how resonate it was, because when I first showed the book, some people said, well, it's a little strange and Israeli, exactly your question, Tsila. An Israeli comes to New York and decides to like capture this magnificent experience in a foreigner's eyes, but inside there, in a different language. There's a lot of steps of translation. But look, I mean, as I said to you before, to see the New York Times calling this a masterpiece, it's not bad, you know. It's pretty nice.
Yeah. Well, I have to agree. And for everybody that haven't had the chance to read, so we warmly recommend you will do that. Wonderful book. Before our conversation, I read it, of course, again, and I was amazed again by the language, by the world that you are building. And I wanted to ask you, you have a very, very small figure, you know, somebody that pop up at the book, Israeli guy.
Yeah.
Not the description you give him is not very flattering. Is it like, I felt like it Hitchcock, you know, walking at the background of the scene. Is this you?
Yeah, it is me. It's the face of
With the
the
two dogs. With the two dogs.
Yeah, we had two dogs then. Unfortunately, they died a few years ago. But yes, this is, look. I am not a comedic writer. I write tragedies for some reason, even though as you know, in my everyday life, I'm not a tragic person, but my work is often of the tragic world. But these are the little places where I can also be a little playful. And
Yeah.
this was a little playful game, but at the same time, it wasn't just a shtick. I planted myself as one of the characters there, very minor, in the background, as the foreigner, who walks the street and has a fresh look on not only on New York, but also he sees Andrew.
Yeah.
And their eyes meet a few times, and Andrew feels that this man may have something to tell him, but it doesn't come to fruition. So there was definitely also a philosophical and artistic statement there, not just a playful shtick.
Yeah, and the Andrew and the whole book is very sensual. It's intellectual and sensual at the same time. And I had the feeling that you have a very complicated relationship with two, I would say, two way of feel the word, understand the word. Maybe you can speak about it a little bit.
Yeah, I would love that. Before that, I have to. I just remembered what my dear wife Carolyn always says to me: make sure you tell people a short version of the plot so people will get what we're even talking about.
Go ahead. Yeah.
For those of you who haven't read the book yet, I hope. The novel happens in New York of the year 2000 to 2001. And it follows a year in the life of Andrew Cohen, who is I think, a very intriguing character, a very elegant, successful, urbane man, a professor of comparative culture, which is not it's a non-existent discipline. He is kind of the embodiment of the spirit of New York of the time. He is very connected everywhere. He sits in all the right boards. He's like in all the right editorial. It publishes in all the right places. Always knows where the wind will blow, where the wind blows politically, fashionably. So he's very fashionable, intellectually and otherwise. And then during the year where we meet Andrew, all his world, or at least the facade, the very tight facade of his life, gets cracked and collapses. Everything that seemed to work for him stops working for him, internally and externally. His relationship with his ex-wife, his daughters, his academic career, his young girlfriend. Before that, he was like a character from a Woody Allen caricature film, like almost a caricature of the New York success story.
A kind of a cliche in a way.
Yes, yeah, he is a cliche, and the book regards him as that. And that's actually, he's even aware of the fact that he's a cliche and kind of cultural. Ironic.
In a very sophisticated way.
Yes, very sophisticated, very self-aware. All this collapses. As the book proceeds, we walk through Andrew's unraveled life and mind. As this happens, something very strange happens to Professor Cohen. He begins to see visions. He hears sounds, he sees sights, he smells things. He begins to be visited by a string of visions that become stronger and stronger, of some ancient shrine, of some ancient ritual that seems at the same time very alien but yet familiar. He is beginning to see visions of the Holy Temple in Jerusalem. Now, Andrew is a very acculturated Jew. He's Jew, I would say, almost by name alone. And
Cohen?
Yeah, but what a name this is, Cohen, which he, of course, doesn't refer to, as anyone who knows Hebrew and knows that Cohen is not, somebody told me once that Cohen is like the Jewish Smith. It's like the quintessential Jewish name, but it's not. Kohen means a priest in Hebrew. That means he's of the priestly clan, sons of Aaron, those who served in the ancient ritual of ancient Israel. And this ancient past leaps on him as if from an ambush. He's the least likely candidate. And yet his life becomes an arena of the eruption of an ancient memory, collective memory, and also personal. So we follow Andrew through this, and we also see the city through his eyes. And the city becomes a more ancient, more mythological, more unraveled city as his life becomes all of the above. So this is the plot, the main plot. There's another plot that happens not in New York and not now, happens in Jerusalem, in the Holy Temple, some 2,000 years ago, Roman era, pretty close to the destruction of the temple. And this plot is laid on the page, not like a regular literature as we know it today, but as a Talmudic page. So it has the whole graphic and fonts and quotes from the Talmud, the Bible, Midrashic literature. And there's a second story about some unspoken rivalry between two priests in the temple on one distant day of atonement in Jerusalem, as the temple was still operating. And those who will read the small print of these pages will understand better what's happening to poor Andrew Cohen in New York of the year 2000. So that's the premise of the story. And this is how I planted the deep Jewish past in contemporary New York. The tension between ancient Jerusalem and modern New York, between deep memory and the short memory of the city, between the tribal and the archaic, and between the postmodern and the contemporary. These immense tensions are what drew me to this work and what kept me working at it. Did I answer your question, or I just described the book?
No. That's the beginning of an answer. So, but let me ask you, When we walk in your Jerusalem, in the book, we can smell the smoke from the ruined house, or even from the house with,
Yes.
and from the shrine. But when we walk in New York, we feel the smell of the bakery, of the fresh bagel, of the meat, of the chocolate, the Godiva
Yes.
chocolate. I mean, food is a very strong theme at this book.
It is. It
And
is.
Andrew likes to cook. He likes to host. Do you like to cook?
I love to cook. I love to host. I love food, not just to eat food. I love the history of food. I love the mythology of food. I love the symbolism of food. Food for me is not, it's not a side, it's not like a little something in life. Food is a main, is a main focus, as an intellectual focus for me. It's not just a sensual focus. I feel that the relationship we have with food is the most intimate of all sensual relationships. Whenever we say sensual, usually the mind goes to sex. I don't know about everybody around here, but I think people eat much more than they have sex. But maybe I'm just projecting on myself on you here. But also, it's the deepest intimacy is the first intimacy is oral, and it's food. The other layers of intimacy come later. And I think that food is also a very deep metaphor to our cultural identity and our fantasies about our identity. So I love to work with food when I write. I love to describe food. I love to delve into cooking methods and cooking thinking, and mostly into the what kind of fantasy do we project on ourselves and the world when we engage in eating, drinking, cooking, or talking about food. So New York is indeed a culinary mecca. Was, again, the great restaurants of New York, some of them have collapsed already now because of the corona crisis, and others might collapse after them. And this is one of the things that might empty the city from its spirit. I mean, I've been actually corresponding with some friends who are also gourmands, and like sending them the names of the new restaurant that collapsed and was closed. Not that I don't even remember if I ever went there, but just knowing it's there. New York is a place where people come to eat as well as to do other things, because it is so not only cosmopolitan, but it's where the best of the best is. So the same way we come to New York to consume the best art, we come to New York to consume the best food, the best wine, the best experience. This makes the city so powerful, symbolically, not just politically. And that's for me, the charm of New York, is the senses, is that sensual volcano of sensuality and fantasy. And by the way, ancient Jerusalem, as the Talmud describes it, is similar. We think of Jerusalem today as a rather, small city, and the ancient places are kind of, it's archaeology, it's ruins. But Jerusalem of the temple was a place where people came to consume beauty and to consume the sensual, not just to pray in a temple. It was a beautiful, beautiful place, rich, decadent. The word decadent is important here. The novel paints a very decadent picture of New York. Jerusalem was a very decadent city before the destruction. The Talmud is filled with stories of decadence. They're wonderful stories.
Yeah, we are not long after Tisha B'Av, and even if you read Megillat Eicha, and the description of Jerusalem, of the ladies of Jerusalem, you can feel the decadence.
Yes, yes, great decadence. And you know something? For artists, austerity is boring. We, even if we're not decadent people ourselves, which we may or may not be, I don't know, but excuse me, decadence is a very lush, fertile ground for us to work with. Ethics are not what we work with in art. We work with aesthetics. Decadence is a celebration of the aesthetic, a celebration of the senses, but it's not just senses. Decadence is something where ethics are tossed aside in the name of aesthetics. That's a very attractive artistic environment for me, and I think for many artists.
But I want you to be more specific about the way New York treat food, or New Yorker treat food, because, you know, last year I spent a few months in Italy, in Milan, all before Corona and the crisis there, and I couldn't help notice that for Italian, for Milanese, the most common conversation is what are we going to eat for lunch? And then where are we going to go to aperitivo? And then what kind of wine we will have in the evening? And this is, you know, this is the way you live. But the way you describe food in New York, and from my experience in New York, it's not about eating, it's about buying, consuming, spending money, showing off.
Power. Yes.
Power.
Absolutely.
Can you talk about it?
Look, of course, everything we're going to say now is going to be a poetic license. I mean, you can't say a valid statement about a city of 12 million people. You know, some New Yorkers don't eat and don't consume. Some New Yorkers eat like Italians. Some New Yorkers, you know.
Of course.
But if I am to make a general statement about how we treat food in New York, especially in Manhattan, by the way, which is a more intense, condensed version of the New York frenzy. I would say food is power. All senses are power. Style is power. This is the real capital of an empire. Therefore, it's a power magnet. People come here in order to gain power, but also to exercise it and show it off. So it's not just the food. It's real estate. It's fashion. It's even our museums. You know, people come. You go to the MoMA right now, and yes, it's wonderful because you get like the greatest anthems, you know, of modern art. But to me, in a way, it feels like an act of power to amass all the great anthems and own them. So now you have to come to New York. You have to do a pilgrimage to New York in order to spend an hour or two in the presence of the great European masters, for example.
Okay, so the pilgrimage, this is the point. The pilgrimage.
Excuse me, again?
I say the pilgrimage, this is the point.
Yes, it is. And it is a pilgrimage where people come in order to taste the power and in order to participate in this great drama. Consumerism, which is really has become, to me, the most New York trait. It's beyond capitalism, it's consumerism now. It is a way to show that you are above the human frame, above the you can spend in one day what a regular person living elsewhere can spend in a lifetime.
So
Okay,
let's talk about what happened now. You talk about the power, the drama, the human frame, above human. And now we are in the middle of a new time.
Yes.
Maybe a new era. I can tell you all that the first week of the Corona, I every morning I open my computer and I was looking for the New York Times to see what's going on in New York, and I was amazed because the fact that Jerusalem is silent, this was amazing, but the fact that New York is in silent, this is something that you couldn't figure out that it really happened.
Yes.
So tell me from your window, from your home, what is going on in New York?
Well, there were various stages, and the depth of the horror were the first 3 months where like New York was in denial, America in general was in denial, New York was in pure denial. It was clear that New York is going to be the hub of the disease because so many people come in here. It's so out of control in a wonderful way. This is why we love New York. It's out of control. Everybody pours in here with their fantasies and their viruses to come and like infect each other with their imagination and their viruses. It was clear that New York is going to become a disaster area. And I feel that there was a sharp, almost like, you know, there's a train rushing in full speed, one of those express Acela trains, and then coming to a sharp screeching halt. This is how I experienced. Suddenly, New York came to a complete standstill. Very scary. And we stayed for a few more days, and then we left the city for a while, for a few weeks, because it was too much to bear. It was too much. We were outside of the city, came back a few weeks later I will not forget this visit. It was very scary to be here because all the life was sucked out of the street. And coming to a New York that streets are empty, stores are closed, everybody is like shrouded in these, now we're used to the masks, but it was a visual shock. It was a very traumatic visit for me. I remember we planned to stay a bit, we ran back, it was too much to bear. Slowly, we get used to it and the city came back to itself. I know there were a lot of beautiful moments of resilience and because, you know, New York is full of energy and vitality in spite of this. Communities moved underground, you know, moved to Zoom. The communities are thriving, people are speaking, but the actual city, until the late spring, I felt the city itself was like a corpse. I really felt the same scary feeling when you see a lifeless corpse. That was until short time ago was a living creature and suddenly it's dead. There's a jarring feeling, very harrowing. It took me back to the first days after September 11. There was a similar feeling of apocalyptic feeling. Apocalypse. End of days. As if it's never going to come back.
Do you still have this feeling?
No, I do not. I feel that I am worried about many aspects of the city, but I already see how the vitality is seeping back above ground. And look, people, at least in our neighborhood, in the Upper West Side, people are careful and people walk with masks and only sit outside. But the feeling of life, this kind of stubborn vitality that is city life, I feel it's sprouting out of the cracks of the sidewalks again. It is much slower and much quieter than the city I know and love. It's funny, the other day I was like driving around in my car looking for parking here in the neighborhood. And I remembered like Jerusalem of the summer, you know, where there was like Jerusalem when I was growing up, when there were not that many cars in the street and it felt like sleepy. And we never feel sleepy in New York. And there was like a sleepy feeling. And on one hand, I felt a sense of nostalgia. On the other hand, I was feeling a little stressed out by it because this is not the place that we live in. It's objectively, people are worried about real things like the theaters, the restaurants, the businesses. This is what brings people here. This is what makes the city a center for world culture. And I don't know what's going to happen with these things. Will they reopen? How will they reopen? Is Broadway going to be no more? The famous restaurants are going to collapse one by one. The museums, what's going to happen with the museums, and so on and so forth. These are all details in this great mosaic.
From what you know, what happened to the Jewish institutions?
Look, that's a complicated question. Depends which Jews you speak about. We know that there was a big rift between, in the beginning, it might be a little better now, between most of the Jewish world and between the ultra-Orthodox, what they call here Hasidic, but it's not just Hasidic, but black hat, ultra-Orthodox world, where there were our synagogues and our JCCs closed immediately and to the day are closed, and we participate Jewishly by Zoom alone. In the Orthodox, more ultra-Orthodox and Orthodox, in the Hasidic world, there was a denial and there was a struggle against this social distancing and closing. And it caused a lot of tension in the Jewish world and also caused tension between these communities and their neighbors. To begin with, it is a dangerous thing to be a minority, especially Jewish, in a time of a plague, especially if you are conceived as those who spread the plague. That sounds familiar, right? We've been there. Mm-hmm. We know that position. Mm-hmm. Not a very good position to be in. So there was a lot of tension within the Jewish world where liberal Jews and just modern Orthodox Jews were very upset with the Hasidic sects that denied COVID and had much higher rates of mortality and disease than any other community. I know that something similar happens in Israel and causes a lot of tension and hatred and anger.
But I would say that the tension in Israel is only a trigger. You know, it's not that the relationship with the ultra-Orthodox change. It just in this crisis, the tension is more and more. I believe this is a trigger. I don't think this is a cause.
I think that's a very astute observation, and I think here too it's a trigger. Although you have to understand, coming from Israel, it takes a while to understand that here in America, the relationship between like the different ways of being Jewish is much less close. Like for somebody living in, I don't know, anywhere in America, practicing Judaism in this way or that, the connection to like Hasidic Jews is anecdotal. You may live your life and never see one. In Israel, it's a very close proximity, and the politics and the inner struggles within a small society. Here, there's very little connection between some reform community in some suburban place somewhere, and between a Hasidic community in Borough Park. There's very little that they have in common. They could live full Jewish lives and never once touch each other. So there's less of an agitation already, but I think that it does bring up deep archetypical fears and animosities within our people. It's about mostly, how do you see yourself as part of the larger society? Is your main identification American society, or is it just a big nothingness and your whole focus is on your little Jewish community? Big difference in how you perceive yourself as a Jew. And these differences became very present because of Corona. Because imagine the anger of liberal Jews when they find out that it's their people, or those who are supposed to be their people, that are considered in large parts of New York as the carriers of the disease, those who spread it, whether it's true or not, by the way. I'm not talking about in numbers, how many Hasidim got it and how many other people got it because of the Hasidim. But this became the conception, and it was not good. It was not pleasant.
Well, I can tell you that in Israel, we are now having this color cities, red cities, green cities, and it's quite, everybody can see that the red cities are the cities with a lot of, it's Beitar Illit, it's Bnei Brak, it's Natzeret, it's Jerusalem, and Bet Shemesh, so you can easily find out very, nobody will say it up front, but these are the cities where the ultra-Orthodox communities are more strong, and the numbers are higher, and I think that brings a lot of tension.
It does. Well, we also have to remember that these communities are very, very poor and live in great density. So it's not just, they're bad and they don't listen to the government and that's why they cause it. Also,
they don't have they don't have any other choice.
The same thing happens, by the way, in other poor neighborhoods in New York. Mm-hmm. Like in everything else, the poor are the first to pay the price, the first to feel the brunt, to bear the brunt of everything. In poor neighborhoods that are not Jewish, there was more mortality, and you understand why. They're dense. There's nowhere to run. There's nowhere to distance. The medical services are lesser, and then more people are sick. I mean, it's a privilege. So somebody wrote, it was a very interesting article, speaking about the social distancing as a privilege. If you can pick up your family and leave the city for a few weeks,
of course,
that's a privilege. You're safer, you're less stressed out. If you can't, it's already a harder experience and can take a bigger toll on you, your health, your life, your relationship, everything. And here too, we see that class and money and power also dictate life chances and how people respond to this crisis.
In Israel, we can see, the students, young people that leave the city, going back to their parents' home in the suburbs because they can't afford to pay the rent. Or even to pay the money for food, and because the suburbs are much more comfortable when you have to stay at home. So suddenly the city is not very attractive. And of course, we can see it in Tel Aviv and even in Jerusalem.
Yeah, look, the whole joy of city life is the friction, the fact that you're with people. That's what makes it's not like you know, the apartments here are much nicer than big houses somewhere, and it's the human factor that makes the city into such a wonderful place to live. I'm a very urban person, loving city life, always did. And
So do you think that the change, that our cities are going to change and never
I think
be
they will.
the same again?
I think they will. I hope it's going to be less dramatic than some of us like to say, but I'm worried that it's going to be more dramatic than I would like it to be. I know already that there's going to be some changes are going to be irreversible. And if New York got over September 11 with astonishing speed, soon after the disaster, the city kind of shook off the dust and pretended it never happened. Coated it, you know, made a whole bunch of ceremonies and tugged the trauma away. This is not just a trauma. There is something about a renegotiating proximity of people to each other. Physical distance, but every other distance may change forever the texture of our community in the city. It may never be quite the vibrant, unmediated experience that I, as a city person, loved so much. That distance may remain even after the virus is going to be gone, which I hope it will be sometime soon.
Ruby, I must tell you that after reading your book, you have this a prophecy character, so I'm listening very carefully, but I will bring you back to your home and to your table. Last crisis brought you your book. Is Corona inspires you to write?
I have considered writing a short story about it, and then I didn't. But you know, it's funny. In the first few months of this crisis, which were the time where it made no sense for me to be focused on my work, I actually was very focused. We all sat together in a very small quarters. Suddenly, nobody goes to work, nobody goes to school, everybody is on Zoom, the dog is barking, everybody is talking loudly to their computer. And I worked with surprising focus, which I'm usually not the king of focus. It's a big struggle for me writing. I'm not an easy hand, not at all. But a month or two ago, this focus started crumbling a little bit. And I think the uncertainty is beginning to seep in. So I hope soon to go back to a work routine. We have yet to see what's going to come out of this crisis. We have yet to see.
You know, we are doing this encounters with many writers, and we hear from most of them the same thing. At the beginning, it was very inspiring. It makes them very concentrate on words, on their, you know, place. It was very quiet, you know, all this FOMO. They lost the FOMO, but now everybody complains that people start to feel shaky, uncertain, worried. They don't know when it's going to be. They don't see the end. So there is not enough quiet to sit and write.
You can add my name to this list. I feel very similar to this, yes.
So, and we will go to our audience and ask if this is a time to read, not only to write. Do you read now? Do you read a lot?
I read as much as I can. I don't read as much as I read 10 years ago. Aging has not done well on my abilities to read. I read obsessively all my life. Mm-hmm. And my ability to read in the same way has been compromised over the past few years, regardless of all this. But I am holding on to reading as a, you know, as an island of stability. And, and the better the literature, the more stable the island. Just to remind ourselves that there is a humanity, that we do have those inner resources that great art and great literature are the result of, that will sustain us through this crisis.
So I'm glad you give us some hope in these words. We are about to finish our time, and I will ask Doron to pick us a question or two from the audience that he can see in the chat. So Ruby, let's listen to Doron. Doron, are you with us? Can you?
Yes, hi.
Question.
So first of all, I want to say that Stephanie wrote that you really captured something brilliant about cultural elitism. So there are also many compliments. I'll send you the chat afterwards so you can read them all.
Thank you so much.
Judith asks, doesn't the experience allude to the Bavel, to the Babel, which became home for those who lived after the destruction of the Second Temple?
Absolutely, absolutely. And Bavel was not just a place to run away to. Bavel is where Jewish culture as we know and love it today emerged from. So that place of exile, with all its richness and the trauma, but also the richness of the Babylonian experience, is the birthplace of Jewish culture as we know it right now. In many ways, Talmudic culture, rabbinic culture are as much a result of Bavel as they are of Eretz Israel. So I think that that's a very good observation, and I would say yes.
Thank you very much. Desiree asks, there's a growing population of poverty in New York. This was even pre-Trump and pre-Corona. Would you say that the New York symbolism metaphor that of the American dream is merely superficial appearance of presence, possession, and power than in actual terms?
Look, the American dream is something that is a dream. You know, it's never been a reality. It is a dream. It's an ideal. This ideal came under a lot of fire in the past 20, I would say 30 years, increasing fire, where more and more people speak of it as an American nightmare rather than a dream. I'm not sure that this is correct. I think that there's still a lot of very powerful thing about America that people that live here may be too used to and therefore cannot appreciate in full. Having said that, the growing poverty, the distance between the upper classes and the lower classes, the erosion of the middle class in America that have been going on over the last few decades are very worrisome. And yes, they do cause more and more social unrest, especially when you speak to the young right now, for whom the idea of an American dream sounds like a joke. They don't believe it. The social crisis is deep, and I think the health crisis of COVID, Corona, is just going to give it another push to something that has been already happening. It just may have hastened a process of disillusionment, and it is not accidental that more and more voices that lean towards socialism are suddenly heard in the public sphere in America. For the first time ever, I hear this.
Thank you. Larissa asks a very broad question. I don't know if you'd like to answer this, but I will ask it.
I'll answer.
She says, how about the irrelevance of the major Jewish organizations detached from the real problems of the Jewish and Israeli public?
I think that's a very good question. I think that everybody feels that if Jews felt very much at home within denominations and institutions 20, 30 years ago, less and less Jews find their home in a synagogue or a JCC or any Jewish establishment or a denomination. The denominations that governed American Jewish life until one generation ago are losing all their power. I wouldn't say all, but so much of their power. They serve much less as a way of providing a framework of identity. The young generation often finds, the young Jewish generation finds themselves identifying in many other ways that compete on the Jewish slot. And especially those who are leaning towards the progressive side, which really I feel poses a big competition. People will not like what I say, but a great competition on the identity equation, and often is winning, especially as the relationship with Israel of the progressive camp in America and Israel is becoming more and more strained for whatever reason, for the reasons we all know. So it is not a very, it's not a very comfortable time to be Jewish in America. But having said that, I think this actually might be a good time, a fertile time for new modes of Jewish identity. Maybe these old establishments and institutions have finished their course, have run their course. Maybe it is time for new and radical ways of being Jewish. And I know that there are some very interesting things happening with young people. Some of this we may like, some of this we may not like, but they are interesting. So we may see a rebirth of some Jewish life, but in ways that we are not used to at all.
Thank you. Larissa makes another wonderful point here. Besides general issues, it also depends on the city's leadership that can make things a bit better or worse, not just writers, but all artists.
Yes, but you know something? I don't really know what to say about like the city's role in all this. How much money is the city going to give? There's so many artists and wannabe artists, and there's so much of it in New York. Everybody who has any artistic aspiration comes here because they want their shot at the New York dream, if you will. What is the city going to do? Yeah, I mean, it's not the most favorable real estate reality. It's not the most favorable reality, but I don't know if it's the city's job to support every wannabe artist. So it's a good question, very complex, and I don't have a good answer for it.
Thank you very much.
Doron, we will have one more question, then maybe we will open the mics, people to say hi to Ruby.
Absolutely. So the last question is from Michael. He says, if I'm not mistaken, your original family came from the town of Meshed, Iran, where
Yes.
Jews lived for more than 100 years until around the 1930s as forced converts to Islam.
Yes.
When living a robust, secret Jewish life, literally underground. Does Judaism have no role at all in the psyche of Professor Cohen prior to his revelation, or does it exist for him perhaps in a secret, suppressed consciousness?
I think that's a brilliant question. And yes, my family is from Mashhad, both parents, a very, very important part of my identity as a Jew and as a person is the story of our ancestors leading Jewish life in secret and under very dangerous circumstances. And I think that there is something about the suppressed identities that traveled in Professor Cohen's DNA and then claim their freedom in this kind of a volcanic way, yeah, erupt out of him because of this suppression. Professor Cohen is not a person. So Professor Cohen is all of us. We're all, in a way, him. He is an extreme version. He's an interesting version and an annoying version. Depends how you relate to him. But we all are carriers of ancient memory. And we're trying to negotiate that with our existence as modern humans who want to be part of the modern world, who don't want to be stuck looking backward for the rest of our life as a nation, as a collective. So this tension is not going to be resolved. There's always going to be a struggle between the suppression of the past and between the past coming to claim what's theirs. And that tension is what I try to capture in this book.
So I see here some people that would love your book to be translated to other languages than English. So Ruby, you have a work to do.
Yeah, there's a French translation. It was French and Russian and Arabic. These are already done.
Wow. Didn't know that. So I would like to thank you warmly for this conversation and to thank you all for being with us. Thank you so much. Doron will open the mic so you can say hi to Ruby and good night or goodbye for me here in Jerusalem.
Thank you, Tsila. Thank you so much.
דורון, אתה פותח לנו?
Microphones are open.
Everybody can shout in unison. Thank you all.
תודה רבה.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. תודה לכם. Thank you so much, all of you.
תודה לכם.
Such a pleasure.
תודה רבה.
תודה רבה לך.
היה נעימה.
Very much from Rome, Italy.
Oh, nice. How
Thank
is
you
it
from
go-
Canada. Thank you
Thank-
from Canada.
Oh, nice. Oh, it's a
Also the same from Brazil. Thank you very much.
Wonderful.
Mm.
Thank you.
Angela James from South Africa.
Oh, nice. Wonderful.
Marsha Talmadge Schneider from the Upper West Side, Minyan Ma'at Ruby Motek. Yasher koach.
From far and near.
Very
Very much
Nice.
from Valencia, Spain.
Valencia, איזה יופי. Thank you.
כל הכבוד. תודה צילה גם.
תודה לכם, רובי. Look what a bet midrash we have here around the world. The corona gave us this opportunity, so we should be thankful for that.
Yes, yes. תודה רבה. Thank you all.
תודה. לילה טוב.
לילה טוב לכולם. תודה רבה.